Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today is day 4 of NAHASDA Essential Trainings with Cheryl A. Cosley. It is January 9th. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and today I will be your webinar facilitator. I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center. A quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts and requirements and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. The materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws and treaties. The terms permit you to use the sites for your personal and non-commercial use only. You may print or save copies of the site solely for your personal and non-commercial use. You may not distribute, transfer, transmit, copy, upload, download, post, publish, display, perform, modify, or otherwise create derivative works from any of the materials without the Seminole Tribe's prior written consent. All right, now to the fun stuff. Once you log on, remember everyone, once you register once, you're good to go. You don't have to register again. You can access today's presentation slides available for download, as well as the rest of the webinar materials in the courses page. You're just going to go ahead on the right-hand column side and click courses, and under courses, it'll be under virtual classes. Once you join and log in, all you have to do is click that green banner in order to get into today's webinar. Once you log on, it will conduct an audio test before bringing you into the webinar. Please select listen only to avoid any audio feedback during the webinar. If you wish to change the speaker you are hearing the webinar audio from, please click the phone icon. We'll bring up a list of your speaker and mic devices so you can select the one you prefer. Now you'll be able to access the chat and the shared notes to access important links and to send a message into the webinar chat. You can also send your questions in here and Cheryl will monitor them. All right, so let's go ahead and start introducing ourselves in the chat. Please take a moment and send your name, where you're joining from, your work or role in Indian country, and your tribal affiliation. And it looks like we've got Nina already starting it off. Thank you very much. Just a quick final note, please do not click anywhere on this red section. If you click on this red section, it will take you out of today's webinar. Have no fear though, if you are taken out, log back in, click that green banner, and you're right back into the webinar. And it is with a pleasure that I now pass it off to Cheryl.
Oh. I said, have no fear, but there's some good materials over there, guys. So welcome to day 4. Thanks for coming back. You're almost done. I guess we'd be in the 3rd quarter. As she said, this presentation is in conjunction with HUD and the Native Learning Center. All my materials are at the beginning and the end. If you ever need anything, welcome and good afternoon. We'll try to get out or finish right around 3:30. I've been running like 5 minutes late Indian time, but maybe today we'll be there. Make sure that you do grab some of these reference materials. You can see through every presentation how one of them kind of works back into another one. Yesterday was the IHP and the APR report form guidance for one, and it did discuss again the total development cost. Donald, you've got an open mic.
The legend.
Donald from Leech Lake, you have an open mic. Cool. Okay, so make sure you grab these guidance. They will definitely help you in the future. So our course objectives, again, we went through them every day. We're going to discuss some of those key issues in implementing your block grant program, answer your common questions, walk through the grant process, and provide a basic summary of NAHASDA programs rules and key elements. No way you can learn NAHASDA in 1 week. I actually had a training thing that pretty much said that's what somebody wanted to do, and nope, that's not going to happen. You know, I've probably been doing this well since 1990, and I have not learned everything. It is, and it's ongoing. It's always changing. That's why it's up to you to make sure that you keep learning. Training free of charge. Make sure that if you need it, if you're lacking in any portion that has to do with housing, you can request a trainer to help you or your staff virtually or in person to make sure that you guys succeed. So today we're going to go a little bit into grant management, program administration, again, all those other federal requirements and financial management. Tomorrow we'll finish up with the conflict of interest, our record keeping, our reporting, and our required maintenance and inspection and things like that. Okay, so grant management, what is it? You know, you're going to get your grant amount, you're going to outline your activities. Who's going to benefit from those activities? We're going to make sure that it's listed in your IHP, execute the grant agreement, find your participants and select them, and then you're going to administer that particular program. And you can have a wide variety, as you saw over the last couple of days, offer with NAHASDA funds. Remember, they got to relate to housing, and your primary beneficiaries are your low-income Native American people. So there's grant agreements that you have to execute when you get your funding. These are all of these legal documents, lobbying certificates, assurance of compliance, Indian preference. We have to use Indian preference. So you're going to certify that you're going to do that. And then if you don't, you'll end up getting a finding, you know, whether it be through your audit or your HUD monitoring. This is what a funding approval agreement looks like, the front page of that. Oops. And then your grant steps, you know, you complete that grant agreement, you make sure that you have ELOCs access. ELOCs is how we get our money if you're not the executive director or if you're not in finance. Writing down a name here. And it used to be dialing for dollars, basically, is how we would go about doing that. Now it's over the internet. You can query it a lot easier, but that's how you draw down your money from the federal government. And you complete and you submit any other required HUD documentation. And then you do your environmentals. You know, before you spend any money, you got to make sure that that's done. So that internet version of that LOX voice control system, I used to say, shh, I'm dialing for dollars, you know, and you would literally talk to a computer and answer you in that electronic voice coming back at you. So this is much easier. So you make draws against your budget line items. Oftentimes you'll have to wait for the HUD office to do, they'll say, well, we have to spread your money, and they put it in the accounts that you're allowed to draw from. There's guidance, goes back to 2014-08, gives you instructions how to access ELOCs. It's simpler to use. There's more reporting capability and an increased ability to utilize queries. Now, depending on your authorizing officer, I guess you would say, sometimes it's your tribal chairman. So I experienced a little bit of trouble when I had rollover in tribal chair. You know, within my tribe, the elections are every 2 years. Ended up working with one of the legal staff for the tribe that were there for many years, and they would walk the tribal chairman how to authorize our use of ELOCs or any change of information that they had to do. Because it asked for social security numbers and all sorts of things, and a brand new chairman, they're busy. And this might get put on the back burner when they're not sure what they're doing. So that was my way around that. Should any of you ever find yourself in that particular situation, you know, find a longtime person that works within the tribal office Usually your legal staff is, you know, the ones that they will go to for things like that, and walk them through how to do that. So this is a sample form 425 grant reporting. Unless you're an investment tribe does it quarterly. We used to have to. You report on your expenditures and things like that through your grants. We only have to do them yearly now. They changed that about a year and a half ago. So 2022 is when they changed that. These are all the cross-referencing documents, and it allows now that annual performance report and reporting on your annual task. It's due 90 days after the end of your program year. But if you're an investment tribe, like I said, it's within 30 days of the end of each quarter. Also, if your finance is done out of house within the tribe itself, it might be a good idea to have them do those quarterly. You can come about and get those numbers that you need a lot easier for your APR and your IHP. So oftentimes we'll ask that they keep doing that, and just file them or send them to the housing entity, and then you have a much better grasp on your numbers. So that SF 425 accounts for funds received and dispersed. If you're an investment tribe, you submit them quarterly. It's due 30 days after the end of the quarter, and you will note all your disbursements and your drawdowns. So under program administration, sorry, I keep clicking too many at a time. The types of requirements are your administrative and your planning cost, making sure that you have all your operating policies in place. This is going to be one of the areas where 2 CFR Part 200 will govern a lot of your activities. That's the OMB Uniform Administrative Requirements. Remember, that's that last document I talked about on the very first day that you go to if you can't find it in the statute, you can't find it in the regs, you can't find it in the program guidances or your PIH notices. This one, your tribe also uses, but it's not written just for tribes or housing authorities. So it's the most difficult almost for us to utilize and find our way around. Okay. Cooperation agreements, subrecipient agreements, our requirement of building under total development cost, our requirement that we put useful life restrictions in, and there's restrictions if we're going to be an investment tribe. And we're going to talk about several of those during those requirements in this module. So again, your administrative and planning cost is dependent how much you're allowed to utilize on how much of a grant you get. So 20% if you receive 500,000 or more. If your tribe gets 500,000 or less, you're allowed 30% of that grant allocation within a program year for your administrative and planning cost. HUD can always approve a higher percentage, but you don't see that very often. I've never seen it at all. So your administrative or eligible administrative and planning cost, A&P expenditures are expenses associated with the expenditure of non-Indian housing block grant funds on affordable housing activities, if those funds limit the expenditure of its funds on A&P expenses. Okay. And sometimes that's how a reg will read, and you got to read it like 3 times for it to actually kick into what it actually, means. It can be used for monitoring and evaluation, as I alluded to the second day, your IHP and your APR, or yesterday, the third day. If you ever find yourself in the situation where the person that normally prepares that, your executive director or whomever, is no longer there, you can pay for that to be done through your A&P cost. Just remember, first thing you do is call the HUD office and tell them, I'm without the person that normally does that. They will start walking you through, whatever you have to do to start your clock ticking so you don't lose that money. They don't want that to happen. And the other thing is you can always challenge the formula using those funds. Remember, when you do a formula challenge, though, it has to be done March of the previous year funding. So the money the money that they are going to announce in June of this year, your preparation would have to be in and filed by March of 2025. Okay, so it's got to exceed it by that quarter. So your maximum A&P to report on your APR, if your cap is based on the estimated block grant expenditure and your actual expenditures are less than what you estimated on your IHP, the A&P expenditures can't exceed your percentage used, whether it be that 20 or that 30% cap, times your actual expenditures or your IHP amount, whichever is greater. So you have to make sure your finance person is watching that also. Your finance component is a lot more than you think it will be. And it's one of the most difficult positions you have to fill within your housing entity. I went through several of them. Just because they can do accounting doesn't mean they can do HUD accounting. Let's just put it that way. It's a different beast. So you can also have reserves for your A&P cost. You can read about that at 1,239. You can establish a reserve account to build up your A&P cost less than or equal to 1/4 of a 5-year average. Expended by you as a recipient has to be related to affordable housing and has to be stated, or, we're going to do this activity in your IHP. Oops, did it again. Operating policies and procedures. You have to make sure you have all of the required ones. And then there's going to be some that are not required, but are definitely necessary. Okay. Payment policies, eligibility policies, admission policies, tenant selection policies, who's going to do that selection, occupancy policies, finance policies, management policies, maintenance policies, travel policies, procurement policies and procedures, and a good filing system. Procurement can get you into trouble if you don't do that right. Acquisition and relocation policies, and an investment policy if you want to be an investment tribe and meet that criteria. Okay, so that uniform guidance, the Code of Federal Regulations 2 CFR Part 200, they're commonly referred to as the Uniform Guidance for Federal Awards, or you'll hear it called Part 200, and it replaced and it consolidated and streamlined 8 federal regulations that we used to have to follow. It applies to all federal grants and other types of federal awards. That's why your tribe is governed by this document also. So this is what used to be in that document. So if you go to any of your finance policies or your procurement policies, and this is what I always tell them, if you see any of those A numbers listed in your policies, you need to redo your policies. They're outdated. Okay, they have to reflect 2 CFR 200, not A21 or A122 or A133. And oftentimes what you'll do is you'll reference that in policy sometimes, and it can't. Okay, you've got to reference the 2 CFR 200 and those proper laws and regulations. So as I said, 2 CFR Part 200 will govern also your management systems, written policies, written procedures, your insurance requirements, your drug-free workplace, your procurement, your reporting and your record keeping, your conflict of interest in the administration of contracts, your auditing, and your allowable and unallowable cost. We're not allowed to buy liquor with our funds. There's certain, can't pay those taxes, certain things you can't spend federal funds on. So your subparts of that particular document at a glance, subpart A is the acronyms and the definitions, B is the provisions, general provisions, C is your federal award requirements, your contents of your awards, D is your post-federal award requirements, your cost principles are at E, F is your audit requirements, okay, and 12 is those appendices. And then we have those cooperation agreements that I talked about if you build off of your reservation. Cooperation agreements, taxation, request for a waiver, And those are governed by 2003-02 local cooperation agreements, which HUD will require you have in place. Because we can't pay those taxes, and you have to make sure that your properties are covered by, fire and water and ambulance service and all of those other things that a city would offer. Okay. So the cooperation agreement provisions, agreement with the local government to ensure that those local government services will be provided to your housing participants. Housing is exempt from all real and personal property taxes. The pilot, payment in lieu of taxes, can be negotiated between the recipient and the local government up to the maximum amount to compensate the local government for service cost. And it's a per unit cost that's spelled out within that particular document. So I had one client, and I referred to them when I was discussing this the other day, where they purchased the properties after they were built, so there was no pilots in place. And HUD wanted them, as one of their monitoring findings, to go negotiate these pilots. Well, when I looked at that, the executive director was responsible for answering all these findings. When it comes to something like this, I immediately called the tribal chairman and said, your executive director cannot speak on behalf of your tribe. Either you and the council have to do this, or you need to appoint somebody on your legal staff to do these negotiations with this town. So when it comes to pilots, oftentimes that's going to be a place where you're going to go to your tribal council and say, how would you like, this is the requirements, or the legal department. We need to do this, but you as an ED or part of the housing entity normally can't execute agreements like this. So the final rule provides a process for recipients to request a waiver of that cooperation agreement and tax exemption requirements. You have to show you pursued and exhausted all reasonable channels. You request a waiver in writing, demonstrate a good faith effort, identify housing units involved, and provide all pertinent background information. I have something coming up on my screen that I need to show NLC, so that's why I took the picture, guys. Not that I'm taking a picture of any of you. So cooperation agreements only needed when the block grant is spent on units owned by the recipient. What are the services provided? And then you pay that pilot. Not needed when that property is owned by somebody else or it's raw land. And like I said, it can now be waived, but they don't like to. They want those agreements in place. So recipients can request that waiver of the cooperation agreement and tax exemption requirements. You have to show you pursued and exhausted all reasonable channels. You request the waiver in writing and demonstrate your good faith effort. This is what we did. You identify the housing units involved, all the pertinent background information, who you talked to, when you did it, how many units, how long it's been there. You give them all that stuff. And then you have to follow, as I said, that total development cost. It's to help assure affordability. HUD will calculate in that. You go into that document and you tell them where you're building, and they've got figures for every one of our areas. And they know or have a very good estimate of what our building cost should be there. HUD will calculate the hard construction cost, our soft cost, our site cost, and you can request a variance of that amount of that TDC if you need to. Okay. So your total development cost, all residential new construction, rehab, and acquisition, any type of a residential structure, all affordable housing assisted with block grant funds after 2001 is when that regulation came into effect that we have to follow. Funds initially provided under the 37 Act weren't obligated as of 2001. So that The newest total development cost PIH notice is 2024-28. Includes the updated schedule of the maximum amount of funds that can be used for affordable housing. They're printed, every 2 to 4 years normally, but during COVID, everybody's estimates, all of our documents were like 10 to 20% at least at a minimum too low. So they allowed a variance until they published this new one, and they speak to that in here. So pursuant to the block grant regulations at 1156, our affordable housing developed, acquired, or assisted under this block grant fund has to be built to moderate design. Such design is limited. We have limitations on cost all the way around and the design standards that we use. Those limits are published periodically by HUD. They establish the maximum amount of funds from all the sources. So it doesn't matter if the tribe was kicking in money to help build these units, you still have to stay within that amount for that particular building, okay? That an IHPG recipient can use to develop, acquire, or rehabilitate affordable housing. The recipient must complete a comparison of the cost of developing and acquiring and rehabilitating your affordable housing with limits provided by the TDC and may not, without prior HUD approval, exceed your TDC maximum cost for that project. So that responsibility, you are responsible for tracking those, ensuring that amount of funds from all sources used to construct each unit does not exceed your TDC. You must maintain records showing that the housing was developed in accordance with those limits, in compliance with other applicable NAHASDA requirements. Units that improperly exceed your TDC without appropriate HUD approval will not deem to be what they call affordable housing, and all the funds you expended to build those will be disallowed. So it can't come from your block grant, or you'll have to repay it if you've used it. So you don't want that to happen. So, if you're in an area and the tribe says, no, you can provide this and this and this, make sure you let them know that you have to build within those constraints. It has to be moderate. And even if it's their money building or giving those upgrades, it's not allowable. So your TDC is published for each tribe. It covers your tribal area. It specifies 5 different dwelling sizes ranging from 1 to 5 bedrooms. You can apply it to a multifamily building up to a 4-plex. The construction of each dwelling unit in a duplex or 4-plex has to still meet the TDC limit. Those amounts are based on moderately designed housing. Okay, so there's different mechanisms to be used out there. HUD uses the residential construction cost indices, MS&B and RS means for cost estimating the construction for good and sound quality structures with 5 steps to provide your maximum TDC. So in accordance with Part 1000, the cost of the infrastructure outside the boundaries of a housing site, your off-site costs such as your water, your sewer, your roads are not included within those TDC limits, okay? You get into some places like Navajo, you can be 100 miles from water sources and have to run infrastructure and things like that. So it's really good that things like that aren't in there. Since your published TDCs only cover your tribally recognized land bases, tribes that are constructing or renovating affordable housing outside of their tribally recognized land base, but within their Indian area, defined within your Indian housing plan, must request a TDC from your area EWONAP office. So up in Michigan, we'd be calling the Chicago area office. On a project-by-project basis for those locations. Your Indian area is defined at 24 CFR 1010 as the area in which a tribe or a TDHE operates affordable housing programs or the area in which a TDHE is authorized by one or more tribes to operate affordable housing programs. So that housing of a moderate design, you can read about it 1156, must be of moderate design. For these purposes, moderate design is defined as housing that is of a size and with amenities consisted with unassisted housing offered for sale within your tribe's general geographic area to buyers who are at or below the area median income. Okay, so it can make it tough. The local determination of moderate design applies to all housing assisted under an affordable housing activity, including development activities, acquisition, new construction, reconstruction, moderate or substantial rehab, homebuyer assistance, and model activities. Acquisition includes assistance to families to purchase housing, such as down payment assistance, closing cost, and loan assistance. Units with the same number of bedrooms within a project must be comparable with respect to cost, size, and amenities. You must either use your TDC limit published by HUD or adopt your own written standards for your affordable housing programs to reflect the requirements specified at 1156. The standards have to describe the type of housing, explain the basis for your standards, use similar housing within your tribe's general geographic area. You can read about that at 1158. And for more detail on the required subject matter of those written policies that define moderate design as described at 1156. For each affordable housing project, you must maintain that documentation, sustaining compliance with the adopted housing standard. For purposes of this requirement, a project is one or more housing units of comparable size and design developed with assistance provided by your block grant funds. 158 also specifies that a recipient that develops standards for your own affordable housing may not exceed 10% of your published TDC limit without prior approval. Okay, so you have a 10% variance if you're going to do that, and you should always tell them you're struggling, and maybe there's a way they can raise your TDC, but it's got to be, a legitimate reason. Okay, useful life. That is the period of time which a low-income rental house, low-income housing, basically when you assist anybody with any of that, you utilize your HUD funds, must remain affordable as required under the NAHASDA statute under section 205 and 209. Okay. Requires that your housing units have to remain affordable to either what they call the remaining useful life of the property as determined by the secretary. Now, we discussed this a couple of days ago. Whenever you read that language, that means what you put in your IHP when it has to do with that particular subject. If they find your IHP and they accept it, then the secretary basically deems it, it's determined by the secretary because they've approved your IHP where you've discussed that activity. Okay. Such other period that the secretary determines is the longest feasible period of time. So you're describing your in your IHP what your useful life period is. And that's amazing because I've actually talked to people that have written IHPs for numerous times and didn't know anything about useful life. And I'm like, you've got it in your IHP or your IHP wouldn't have got adopted. Okay, so it's really important that you look at your IHP. If you're not familiar with useful life, you see what period you say you're going to use, and then you need to develop a useful life policy and the procedures, okay, for those binding commitments and things like that. And you're supposed to utilize those within all your programs. It requires a useful life description in your IHP. It applies to new and rehabbed units. Doesn't apply to your mutual help units that are built with 1937 Housing Act funds. Now, there were tribes that liked the mutual help program because it was a wonderful program. And they continued to offer a program like that using NAHASDA funds, okay? In that particular case, if they just named that activity mutual help, it would apply, okay? It does not apply to mutual help units built with 1937 Housing Act funds, not NAHASDA funds. Then that would kick in. So what's your affordability period? When your block grant funds and or Title VI, okay, so Title VI counts too, are spent on a property, and an investment is made for low-income Native Americans, okay? That's why Congress gives us the money. The return on that investment is the period of what they call continued use, during which the property will be available for low-income Native Americans, okay? There's two different guidances. I believe both of them are in your reference materials. If not, you can go back and get the older one. It's got things in it that aren't found in the 2020 guidance, but they're pretty much explains useful life in full, and it will give you examples, okay? Program Guidance 2020-02 clarifies what's going to be considered satisfactory to the Secretary, what constitutes an acceptable binding commitment, provides samples to document useful life for housing units assisted with your block grant funds, and replaces the Program Guidance, 2014-09. So your affordability period, the future use, is your affordability period or useful life for whatever particular property you're talking about or that you have built. A useful life or affordability period must be established for any type of housing units constructed, acquired, or rehabbed when you touch them with your block grant funds, okay, or Title VI, to ensure that property is available only to low-income families for your specified useful life on that particular property. This is the 2020-02 program guidance that talks about that. This is the example that was given in the guidance, okay? It comes from what they call the home program, and it is the one that I have seen 95% of the time that I've been at different housing entities. It's most commonly used. I was up in Alaska, and I finally found one that somebody deviated from this, but not by much, okay? So remember when I was talking even years ago, mine, when it went to down payment agreement, it was like $5,000 or under. So $5,000 or under, it's a 6-month affordability period, okay? 5,001 to 15,000, it kicks up to 5 years. If you expend 15,001 to 40,000, it's a 10-year period. Over 40,000, 15 years. New construction or acquisition of newly constructed housing, a 20-year affordability period, okay? This isn't what you have to use, but this is the one most currently used almost everywhere, okay? So when you help somebody and you give them $10,000 worth of rehab, it would be a 5-year affordability period. You build them a new house, it's going to be 20 years. If they leave that property, if they sell that property, if they dispose of that property, unless it's being passed down, you know, to a different homeowner because of, you know, this would kick in. You would need to find the next participant would have to be low income at the time they entered and Native American, especially when you get to down payment assistance, or they sell a house that you put rehab funds into. That's how that kind of kicks in. Okay, so a minor investment, your affordability period can be a nominal period. NAHASDA requires some period be designated and that it be secured with a binding commitment. So that's why 5,000 or less was that 6 months, okay? Your governing body is going to need to decide, first of all, your amounts and see if they deviate from there, if HUD will pass them or not. And then the second decision is going to be the repayment. Okay, you can do what they call a single recovery amount or a prorated recovery amount. So let's say it's $10,000 for 10 years. I'm in my 9th year. If it was a single recovery amount, I'd owe the 10,000 back no matter what. Doesn't matter when I got in, when I got out. If I got out before it ended, I'd owe the whole thing. If it's a prorated account, it would go down, $1,000 a year using that $10,000 10-year period. And in the 9th year, I'd only owe 1,000. Okay. That's what you're going to have to decide. And like everything else, they want you to treat all of your tribal members the same. So you would use the same structure, and it would have to be single recovery or prorated per program. Now, you can change your perimeters every program you offer, but not between your housing recipients, okay? If that makes sense to you, they want to make sure that you're treating all your tribal members fairly and consistently. Okay, if the period is less than a year, it's not necessary to record the written use restriction for purposes of complying with NAHASDA. It's a good business practice to record the use restriction for purposes of giving notice to subsequent purchasers. Okay. A binding agreement satisfactory to HUD is a written use restriction agreement developed by you as a recipient, placed on the assisted property. So you're going to have an agreement for that payback agreement with your participants, but you're also going to have an agreement in place, or a lien, basically, a restriction agreement placed on that property for the period of its useful life. So depending on what type of property there is, there's like 5 or 6 examples in there. Fee land, trust land, programs guidance 2014-09 provides sample binding agreements that you can use. Okay. So this is an example. A fee land single recovery amount requires the full amount of block grant or Title VI assistance to be refunded or returned to the tribe or TDHE should the property be sold or transferred prior to the end of the useful life or affordability period. Okay. Fee land prorated means the amount of block grant or Title VI funds invested in the property can be prorated over the life of the restriction. In the event of a default, only the current prorated amount must be refunded. Okay. So recommended tracking methods, a spreadsheet with a property address. If you look into those documents I gave you a couple of days ago when I told you, if you were in admissions and occupancy, to print them, those ones for your particular department, there's tracking examples within those documents. Okay. So maintain a spreadsheet with the property address, the owner's name, how much block grant money was spent, what the affordability period was, the form of the binding commitment. Is it filed with the BIA or is it filed at the county clerk's office? What was the date of assistance, and what was, how long is that period in place? Okay. This is your sample, like you will see, in those, it's under self-monitoring. So unit number or property, unit address and location, what type of land it is, land status, what type of unit it is, who the current owner is. On the assistance information, the date you assisted them, the type of assistance, the amount of assistance, the funding source requiring restriction, the use restriction document, the length of the restriction, the start date, and the end date. Okay. So your enforceable agreements, participant agreements, liens on the property, it's got to be recorded, with the BIA or forgivable loan agreements or conditional grants, okay, depending on what that is. So does your housing entity have useful life policies and procedures you know, that you know of. Yes, no, or I don't know. I would love to see that. So as for instance, I had a staff member and I asked her if I could discuss this. Her husband and her got down payment assistance. Ours were prorated. Okay. She was married to a non-native person, and they purchased this unit off of the reservation, and a non-native, non-low-income person bought it after they got divorced. They sold it, and they did not meet any of those conditions. So therefore, they were responsible to pay the money back to the housing authority. If you don't collect that as the housing entity, HUD will make you repay that money. They're very, very strict about that. Okay. So it's, you need to make sure that you have these in place. We have a lot of slippage in Indian country about this, and there hasn't been a lot of trainings done. NLC did have me do one on this at one point. There's just not a lot of information on it out there, but it is a requirement that we have in place, as well as the insurance requirements, where, you know, we have findings on that throughout the country. Not yet. And okay, so make sure you guys, if any more, you please answer. I'd like to see what you know. If you do it, any of the other participants give me a B, or C. Yeah, it's a good thing to find out. Ask them, say, did we do anything about useful life? You now know in your documents, there's your examples, pull them down. And if you hear no, you might want to bring them to your executive director and say, hey, we're supposed to be doing this, you know? So, okay. Yeah, because you have to, if you're utilizing any of your funds. So that's not covered as well as it could be, under here, but that is part of, you know, the overall NAHASDA essentials. But make sure you know the insurance requirements, make sure you know the useful life, because we have slippage there. So investments is the next section under there, and you can invest if you know, meet certain conditions. You can invest your block grant, annual grant, in an amount equal to your annual formula grant amount. The maximum term is 5 years. Any interest earned on funds invested greater than 5 years has to be returned to HUD. Okay, but there are requirements to become an investment tribe also. NAHASDA allows recipients to draw down for financial investments subject to HUD approval. Only certain types of investments are allowable. You can only invest if you have no unresolved audit findings, the tribe is self-governing, or has what they consider administrative capacity. Okay, we're going to talk about some of the other federal requirements, and there's a lot. I'm not even hitting them all, guys. So our other federal requirements cited in NAHASDA applies to us as recipients, must apply to subrecipients if you have them in place, your contractors, your developers, all of them. Okay. Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Act of 1970 assures fair compensation for displacement of families. So say this can kick in if you're buying a property and there's people there, an apartment building. This actually stopped one tribe I know from buying an apartment complex. You've got to make sure that these people are taken care of. Or if you have an incident happen and you have to move some of your tenants, you know, whether it be a fire or, you know, meth use, there's different things that can happen. Electrical problems, you know, rehabbing a unit. When in doubt, always call your HUD office and say, hey, I've got to do this. Will uniform relocation and assistance or real property acquisition kick in? And can you give me some suggestions? Because they, you know, they're there to help. Davis-Bacon. Okay, we talked about that a little bit when we talked about prevailing wage rates. When you expend over $2,000 and it's not your staff, or the tribe doing that work, Davis-Bacon wages have to be paid, okay, because of the use and the type of funds that we get. NAHASDA is one of the related acts. It's called DBRA, Davis-Bacon Related Acts, that causes Davis-Bacon to kick in because they are NAHASDA funds. Okay, 1937 Act did, ARA. There's several types of money that we've received over time that kick in Davis-Bacon. Okay, or you can set your own tribal prevailing wage rate, which can preempt Davis-Bacon if your tribe adopts them properly. Okay, NEPA. We have to follow the National Environmental Policy Act of NEPA. We have to follow the Flood Disaster Protection Act. If you're in a flood zone, we have to follow the Lead-Based Paint Poisoning Prevention Act of 1973, the Uniform Administrative Act, 2 CFR Part 200. We just got done talking about that one. If you're doing any construction, you're building, all of these other things go hand in hand with the Davis-Bacon. Construction contracts over 150,000 are subject to the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act. The Copeland Act, which is the allowable paycheck or payroll deductions that they can charge their workers because they're paying Davis-Bacon and have to pay more. You want to make sure that they're not taking it out or away from those workers. That fair labor standards, that they're getting minimum wage, that they're getting paid overtime, and those overtime requirements. You have to follow GAAP with your accounting, those generally accepted accounting principles. We have to be aware and follow the American Disabilities Act. And then we get into the environmental review. Okay, environmental review is basically do not pass go when you get your money unless you take care of this part of it. Okay, the applicable requirements are under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and the related authorities, 24 CFR, and we fall under 50 or 58, okay, depending. In order to use block grant funds, you have to make a determination that the activity that you're undertaking with the block grant funds will not be destructive to the environment. You do this by becoming familiar with the environmental requirements. All expenditures of NAHASDA funds must be supported by an environmental review record, an ERR. You can read about that at 24 CFR 58.6. And the tribe has two options for determining whether that activity or the use of those funds is environmentally sound. Okay, I teach, I'm a subject matter expert in tribal council and board of commissioners. When I work with the tribal council, I always ask them, please, if you have an environmental department within the tribe, let the housing authority utilize that staff. We, as you can see, your director has so many rules and regulations that they have to follow. That you need help in other areas, use the legal staff, use the environmental staff. So they're not overwhelmed by all of this unless you have this, tremendously big staff. So your environmental determinations, you ask HUD to take responsibility under 24 CFR Part 50. Under this method, HUD is responsible to ensure that all uses of funds from your block grant are in accordance with your NEPA and the related requirements. However, due to staffing limitations, HUD may be unable to complete your environmental review in a timely manner. To expedite this process, the tribe, the TDHE, can gather the documentation and send it to HUD, who will determine if that activity is acceptable under your NEPA and those related requirements. HUD acts in this case as your certifying officer. Now, I don't know a lot of people or tribes that utilize this because you still have to funnel all those documents, gather them all. And HUD's not in the office full time yet, I don't believe, so a lot of our tribes do it themselves. Okay. And this is the area that we have a little slippage in with finance. If the finance is done, if you're a department through the tribe, oftentimes the money gets dropped and the accountant says, oh, I got to pay this bill and this bill and this bill. And they start making these expenditures or paying these expenditures. Okay. And the environmentals aren't done. And we're not supposed to spend our money until our environmentals are done. Okay. It can get you in trouble. It will get you in trouble. So the tribe could take that responsibility, and under that, instead of being 50, you would be 58. So it's part 58. Under this method, the tribe or the TDHE prepares all the required documentation and makes all of those compliance decisions. The forms are signed by your certifying officer. Now, normally when it comes to things like this, it's your executive director. When it comes to an environmental determination, it's the chairperson of the tribe. They need to be able to stand up in court and argue why they made that determination. Okay, so usually it's the tribal chairman before they are submitted to HUD. Your TDHE is not authorized to certify those documents. Only the tribe can exercise this right and responsibility as your, responsible entity on behalf of the tribe. So this is the guidance, 2024-24, that was just published. That is to help us with some of these decisions. It tells you some of the things and gives, that are done quite a bit and how they would fall within that realm. Okay. It's HUD programmatic Part 50 environmental review for the block grant, for the Indian Community Development block grant, and for the Title VI and our Native Hawaiian. Okay. And for VASH. For soft cost, including administration, operations, maintenance, planning, tenant-based rental assistance, public and support services, and certain activities to assist homebuyers. The notice is Part 50 programmatic determination for the administration, operations, planning, management, tenant-based rental assistance, and certain maintenance activities. And it, talks about all activities have to be documented as compliant with the environmental review requirements. And it streamlined the process to reduce the burden on our TDHEs and tribes. And they developed a programmatic environmental review for soft cost, okay, to show you what would fall under that part. It really will help you a lot. This is a brand new document to ensure that your environmental review is completed properly, okay? It'll give you a list of things that are definitely a go, so that'll help. So HUD carefully examines certain operating activities to determine whether a programmatic determination under Part 50 would be appropriate to meet the goal of ensuring that NEPA, you're compliant with that under Part 50. These activities are not subject to further environmental review because they do not alter your physical environment, consequently will not result in an environmental impact, okay? All activities and descriptions that are not included in this environmental review require that separate environmental review requirement before HUD funding is committed or spent, okay? Such review has to be completed before those HUD funds are spent. So that will definitely help you become familiar with that document, okay? Soft cost administration, operations, maintenance, planning. So it's a very good document. It is also in your reference material. So these are our environmental review categories. Exempt is usually your administrative, your engineering, your feasibility studies. A categorical exclusion not subject to 58.5 if you're giving rental assistance, operating costs, down payment assistance. We have categorical exclusions subject to 58.5. Utility upgrades, accessibility modifications, rehab of 1 to 4 unit structures with restrictions, and rehab of larger structures with restrictions. And then you have the ones that call for the complete EA, all projects not exempt or categorically excluded. So that is a very difficult area. And it is really, if you can get somebody from the tribe to do it, or designate one person within your housing staff that knows how to do that, because you have to do it on a yearly basis and you have to keep those files there for audit also. So flood insurance, if you are in a FEMA identified special flood hazard area, it requires that you participate in the National Flood Insurance Program or you have private flood insurance. The problem is Indian country, most of it has not been mapped by FEMA, okay? Lead-based paint, we talked about this. You know about your units, if they were built prior to 1978 or not. I have seen cases where HUD will come in and they'll do monitoring, and the person will come over from public housing. They're not really, familiar with Indian housing, and they'll say, why didn't you pass out this material to your tenants when they went into the rental? Well, because the units were built in 1990, and they'll still issue them a finding for not doing it. So the way that we've started doing, on your tenant file, on the listing of all the things that you have to check for a tenant file, put in great big red lettering, all of our units were built after 1978, therefore contain no lead-based paint. For anybody renting within this particular project, this does not apply. Now, if you give out TBRA, you give out down payment assistance, you do rehab, all of that stuff, your lead-based paint is going to kick in, and somebody has to be paying attention to that. Normally, you get somebody on your maintenance staff that is versed in this, okay? It used to require that we went to school. I remember getting in probably 92, 93, I had to go to, no, it was after that, 93 or 94. I had to go to Dallas, Texas and get a certification in the lead-based paint poisoning. Somebody on the staff used to have that. They don't have that requirement anymore, but somebody on your staff should have good knowledge of this, okay? So real property, we have specific requirements under 1014. Relocation and real property acquisition also, kicks in. The applicable relocation and real property acquisition policies applicable to NAHASDA programs shall include and cover, and read about this at 1014, real property acquisition requirements subject to 49 CFR Part 24, Subpart B. Okay. So first of all, when you purchase land for the housing entity, you cannot pay over the fair market value. Do not pass go, okay? Must be based on appraised value. You can accept donated property or purchase property as long as it's less than that fair market value. You need to get HUD approval if it exceeds that, okay? You're to minimize displacement. Take all reasonable steps to minimize the displacement of any person, household, business, nonprofit when you're purchasing or buying anything or acquiring, whether it be given to you by the tribe or whatever. Hence, if the apartment building that you're purchasing has people in them, this would kick in, okay? And temporary relocation covers tenants and homebuyer relocation cost and adequate advance notice, okay, that you're going to be displacing them. So there's certain things that you do, like I rehabbed pretty much a full project at one point. I mean, fully occupied. I kept one unit empty, supplied washer, dryer, dishwasher, dish soap, laundry soap, boxes, maintenance staff to move people. All the utilities, paid the utilities and, full cable package in there, and moved my tenants in and out of this one particular house when I rehabbed theirs. And worked with HUD hand in hand all the way through to minimize, displacement, or I was displacing, but I was moving them temporarily, but to make that as smooth as possible. Okay. And that's what you're gonna try to do. So real property, the specific requirements, you can read about that at 1014. So this is one of the reasons all these numbers are in here. In the very first day, I tried to teach you how to go about and find these things. So if you need to know about that, you know now that you need to go to 1000, go to 14 and start reading about real property and the relocation and real property acquisition things that apply to you, and the policies and the procedures that you have to have in place to be compliant. Okay. So the relocation assistance for displaced persons, if it's a permanent relocation, you have to comply with what they call the URA and Real Property Acquisition Act of 1970 as amended, and the implementing regulations at 49 CFR Part 24. So I started out saying everything that you need basically is found within the NAHASDA statute, the regulations, the program guidances, the PIHA, and if you can't find that, the uniform administrative requirements at 200. But then you have the wild card of all of those other federal regulations, which will send you looking to places like 49 CFR Part 24 or your environmentals under 50. And, so we have a lot of rules. We're the most heavily regulated program pretty much that your tribe is going to offer. As I said the very first day, it's a lot. Okay. You have to maintain records in sufficient detail to demonstrate compliance with this. That's basically what I just said, and you have to comply with that Relocation Act. Okay. Notify all your relocating families, individuals, businesses, and affected parties. Pay temporary relocation and displacement benefits. The cost of any relocation assistance is an eligible project cost and can be paid from, your tribe, other funding sources, or the TDHE. Acquisition is subject to 49 CFR Part 24 Subpart B. Negotiating fair market value when voluntary transaction. You follow the involuntary procedures when required by the URA. The affordable housing developed, acquired, or assisted under your block grant program is subject to limitations on cost and design standards. Okay. So remember, it has to be of a size with amenities consistent with unassisted housing offered for sale within your general geographic area to buyers who are at or below median income. Probably wouldn't be very nice housing, so it applies to all housing assisted, such as development, acquisition, new construction, moderate or substantial rehab of affordable housing, or homebuyer assistance, and your model activities. And your TDC. We talked about that numerous times, so you know where to look for that. And you need to adopt standards for your housing. Okay. Your standards have to be able to support the reasonableness and necessity for the factors used within that activity. I apologize for that. Okay, there we go. So there is your hierarchy. So now it's grown. We started out with just the regulations. Okay, now we're trumped by adding NEPA to NAHASDA as a law, and then your regulations, Part 1000, Part 200, and then we're going to throw in 50 and 58 for your environmentals under the regulations. Your HUD guidances, those program guidances, PIH notices, your tribal codes. Now you have wage ordinances as a possibility and housing ordinances. And then you have your program policies and your standard operating procedures. That's your hierarchy, but you've got all of those working documents that you have to follow and keep in place there. We have to also follow non-discrimination laws. Age Discrimination Act of 1975, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, 1973. It is an option for use with the American Disabilities Act of 1990, our Indian Civil Rights Act of 1968, Title VI and Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, NEPA, and Davis-Bacon, okay, requires workers to be paid no less than a determined wage for projects over $2,000. The tribe can adopt its own prevailing wage. The Indian Civil Rights Act, which is ICRA, okay, requires the tribe and subordinates to provide due process. The Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act requires preference for Indians in employment when using federal funds under certain circumstances. We definitely have to follow that. Native preference, okay. Section 7 provides that any contract, subcontract, grant, or subgrant entered into for the benefit of a Native American or Alaska Native require, to the greatest extent feasible, preferences and opportunities for training and employment in connection with the contracts, subcontracts be given to Native Americans and Native Alaskans. Preference in the award of the contracts and subcontracts in connection with the administration of our contracts be given to Indian organizations, Native-owned economic enterprises, as defined within Section 3 of the Indian Financing Act of 1974. And you can read about that in Program Guidance 2013-07. And then we have Native preference. So in accordance with the NAHASDA statute under 101, you shall apply the tribal employment and contract preference laws, including regulations and ordinances of your tribe, adopted by the Indian tribe that receives the benefit of the funds granted to the recipient under NAHASDA. In absence of a tribal employment and contract preference law, you as a recipient must give, to the greatest extent feasible, give preference in the award or contracts for projects funded under this part to Indian organizations, Indian-owned economic enterprises, in accordance with Section 7B of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. Okay. And then again, Davis-Bacon, and the tribe can adopt what they call a prevailing wage rate. The prevailing wage rate, as determined by the Department of Labor, has to be paid for laborers and mechanics for all construction and rehab activities. So this is the area about the wage certification. I don't think that'll work. Section 9, basically, and I have to almost get up on it to be able to read. You may use a tribally determined wage when required for IHBG assisted construction or maintenance activities. The tribe has appropriate laws and regulations in place for it to determine and distribute a prevailing wage rate. Okay. That is what is sometimes clicked. When we're filling out our APR and people think it's a tribal wage grid and not a prevailing wage rate that applies to our construction activities, not the employment of all the tribal employees. Okay, so make sure you do not inadvertently select the wrong one. Okay, otherwise you're going to click, we're going to use Davis-Bacon or a HUD determined wage rate when required for block grant assisted construction and maintenance activities. You will use Davis-Bacon or HUD determined wage rates when required for IHBG assisted construction, except for the activities described below. Okay, so they're trying to catch it to make sure, because a lot of our tribes do have prevailing wage rates in place, but if you don't hit that one part. Okay, if you're in doubt, call your HUD office and ask them before you submit it. Requirements again. With home buyer assistance, it applies if you have a prior agreement to use NAHASDA to buy a newly constructed unit. Then Davis-Bacon would actually kick in this circumstance, okay? Otherwise, it applies to all rental and non-maintenance activities, and it does not apply if the contract is less than $2,000, or it's your own force account crew or tribal crew doing the work, okay? Your other labor requirements, contracts that are over 150,000 are subject to your Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act, okay? Copeland, allowable paycheck deductions. They can't be charging them for everything under the sun because they have to pay Davis-Bacon. And Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, minimum wage and overtime requirements, that they're getting paid minimum wage and overtime when they're working it. There's very specific Davis-Bacon rules, postings that you have to put up there. You should be, when you do building, somebody should be going on site and making sure, asking them, what are you, a drywaller? How much are you getting paid? You need to make sure that they're incorporated into your contracts. They have to know, your contractors have to know that they're subject to Davis-Bacon. Unfortunately, it's going to up the price of your contract a lot of times, but their bids won't be correct. You have to tell them that and give them sufficient time, to build those bid amounts. Make sure somebody takes procurement within the tribe if you guys start building, okay? What does your tribe use for a prevailing wage rate? Davis-Bacon, we utilize a tribally adopted wage rate, or you don't know. A, B, or C, guys? Oh, yay, Nina's got one. Anybody else? Hey, guys. Let me see. Oops. Okay, so the other area is that Indian preference. So all of our grants are subject to Section 7B of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. That's Indian preference, okay? Training and employment opportunities are given to Indians under 1050. Preference in the award of contracts you can read about at 1052. You certify you have policies and procedures or tribal codes and regulations in place. You have to have Indian preference clauses incorporated in all your contracts. And the program guidance for that is at 2013-07. Indian and tribal preference in employment, contracting, and block grant acknowledges tribal regulations for Indian preference in procurement. Got A's, A's, and A's. Okay. You need to have the following Indian preference required documents in your depository of policies and things. Okay. You need an Indian preference policy. You should have an Indian preference qualification application, because you need to have your contractors apply for Indian preference. Then you need an Indian preference determination letter, because you have to make that determination and notify the contractors, okay? And then you need a complaints policy. Remember I was telling you when we got into policies, that you need a complaints policy for your tenants, for your employees, and for Indian preference, okay? So there's a required complaints policy for methods for providing Indian preference. And there's a specific amount of days that goes with that. And you can't shorten it because I've had people try it and HUD kicks it back. Okay. So, follow the law on that one. When it says, if it says 20 days, make it 20 days, you know. So this is a sample Indian preference policy. Make sure you guys have one. Your Indian preference qualification application. Your determination, you've either qualified or disqualified them from Indian preference, but you got to make sure that they know that it doesn't prevent them from bidding on the contract. You just can't offer them Indian preference if you don't determine, because you have to make sure that that's not a sham. Okay, that it's over 51%, that Native is actually, you know, a majority owner, basically. Indian firm. And then your Indian preference complaint procedure. It is 20 days. I had somebody try to, I think they tried to shorten it to 14 days, and HUD says, no, by regulation, you have to give them 20 calendar days. That's another thing. When you're writing policy, make sure calendar days or business days. Specify what it is. Just don't put days, okay? So your preference, you must satisfy either tribal preference or Indian preference with respect to your block grant activities, including your administration, your procurements, in accordance with Program Guidance 2013-07. Your Indian preference is not applicable to procurements under $5,000, okay? Section 3, recipients satisfy requirements when you comply with employment and preference laws adopted by your tribe. Almost every tribe, you try to get the copy of the original motion or resolution. It would be a resolution adopting that, but it came from a long time ago, probably. And most tribes have them. You know, we're going to hire Bay Mills members first, and then it's like a reverse order in for layoffs. Bay Mills person will be the last person laid off, you know. Most tribes have those adopted. That's what they're talking about here when it comes to preference laws adopted by the tribe. So your procurement and Indian preference, Section 7B of the Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, you got preference for Indian organizations and enterprises. Document if it's not feasible. If you don't have it, it applies to on-site and off. Certain policies adopt preferences, and the program guidance is 2013-07. You got to remember, and you would learn this like in procurement, just because someone is Native does not mean you have to give them the job, though. Also, they have to be capable. And if you ever come and, you know, have a problem with a contractor, you document. So next time they come in to bid, you do not deem them responsible. Okay. When you hire a contractor, you deem them responsive and responsible are the two things that you should be making sure that those contractors are. Responsive is, you know, getting your stuff done in a timely manner. Because when they don't, let's say it's an electrician, they're going to back all your other tradespeople up. Okay. Just because they're Native American or just because they're from your tribe does not mean that they're responsive and they're responsible and you should be hiring them. And if you do, and they don't perform, document until you can't document it anymore. So the next time something comes out for bid, you can say, I'm sorry, I cannot deem them responsible, you know, and or responsive, and therefore will not be giving them that opportunity. And they're going to go cry to your tribal council. But that's your job to make sure it's getting done correctly and they meet all that criteria. Okay. You'll also have circumstances where you could work with a firm and they could build you 10 houses all day long. Okay. But you're going to put out a project for 50 to 100 houses and they wouldn't have the labor. They wouldn't have the banking. They wouldn't have the staff. to build something of that particular size. You're going to look at a different set of contractors when you do things like that. So you have to be really, cognizant of all of those things, but always, always document when you have problems. Just like when you get complaints, make sure they're in writing. If it's only as good as the paper it's written on, and if somebody can't put the complaint in writing, you shouldn't be accepting it. Financial management, your next part, guys. What is it? It helps your housing business to run smoothly. It includes auditing, record keeping, internal controls, and your cost management. The benefits, long-term financial, demonstrates accountability to your tribe, to HUD, all your tribal members. It's to help you achieve, those program objectives, fulfill your commitments that you put forth in that IHP, effective and efficient use of your federal funds, and accurately organize your grant activities. Okay. One size doesn't fit all. You tailor to the amount of staffing, who's doing what within your organization. Refer to CFR Part 200. So we're going to go to that document that we have to use for all things financial. It's got the financial management systems and internal control standards. Now, your auditor is going to work a lot in this way with you guys on that, okay? You refer to 1026, your administrative requirements for NAHASDA specific requirements. Financial management systems, financial reporting, accounting records, internal controls, records retention, budget control, allowable cost, source documentation, cash management and payments, and financial reporting. Your financial and your fiscal management, your Office of Native American Programs, your monitoring plan of the recipient, okay? This particular document is another one that's in that list that will help you, okay? Is a recipient current with its bank reconciliations? Was the ending bank statement balance reconciled to the general ledger? Has all outstanding checks and deposits been reconciled to the bank department? So these are things in here that will help strengthen your financial and your fiscal management for your departments, okay? Use these documents. Cash receipts, review your written cash receipt procedures. Analyze segregation of duties. This is a big one. They don't like too many people responsible for the same tasks, but it depends on what, I've seen housing authorities that have an executive director and a maintenance man. And then your people are doing, the same task. They're depositing the money and, verifying it and bringing it to the bank. If you have a lot of staff, you can segregate those duties, but this will help you with that also. Non-cash handlers, other staff people preparing the bank deposits, using the slips, reconciling the monthly statements, who's going to receive the cash, open incoming mail, restrictively endorsed checks, make sure that you send out receipts, all of those components. It will give you a good idea as to that there, okay? Test practices. So it's got some good information in here for you guys. Summarize the results of the review. So you use those for your self-monitoring, but you also use it just to strengthen your departments. So your internal control objectives. So you're hopefully reliable, effective, efficient, and compliant, okay? Nothing worse than a finding. So your areas of internal control, your control environment, managers and sets reasonable budgets, identifies allowable expenditures, your risk assessments. Managers and staff are required to use the written policies and procedures as guidance to identify allowable and unallowable cost. Information and communication, department managers compare monthly budgets to actual expenditures, review for accuracy, initiate corrections if needed. The manager follows established written policy of procedures for authorization, approval of purchases based on approved budget prior to purchase. Your accounting provides financial reports to managers for monthly review, including reports to the board. You're supposed to be giving your financing to your board. Sorry, Donald. Hope to see you tomorrow. I'm reading something in the thing. Okay. You're supposed to give your finance to your governing body as part of your meeting minutes. And budgeting. Plan to accomplish goals with the funds available. Budgets are expected to be of a realistic estimate for sources and uses of funds. Submit as Section 5 of your IHP. And why is it important? It helps set your targets, requires funding, that strategy. You got to know how much money you have and what you have for what particular activity. Identify your tribal priorities, control, accountability. It's required under the uniform guidance. Your financial system has to provide for comparison of expenditures with your budget amounts for each federal award. When your tribe or your TDHE undertakes the time to budget, they're making a deliberate decision to plan their financial goals for the short and the long term. Okay, so strategic priorities, resources, activities, eligibility, and capacity. And then you get into procurement, and that's how we're going to pretty much, finish up today. Your procurement also is under 2 CFR. It's found between 318 and 326. It also covers that conflict of interest. Our procurement methods, micro purchasing, anything under $10,000 doesn't require a quote. Small purchasing, 10,000 to 250,000. We have a minimum of 2 quotes. Sealed bidding, an invitation for bid, your lowest responsive and responsible bidder. We talked about having to make that determination. Your competitive proposals, your request for proposals, it's the most advantageous proposal you get. And then you have what they call non-competitive. It's emergency, sole sourcing. You need HUD approval to use this one normally, okay? They do not like sole sourcing. I've had to rebid things 3 times under my HUD office, and I've got a good, nice HUD office, but it's like, nope, rebid it again, see if you can get another, person to answer that bid. Lack of competition, that's how it fell under, okay? You have the ability to increase your thresholds amount above those amounts. There is guidance at 2023-01 in your reference materials if you want to raise your procurement thresholds, but you have to take certain steps to do that, and HUD has to approve you. Recipients have to follow your procurement policy. Become very familiar with that, okay? That's your procurement claw there. All our policies and procedures regarding procurement, we have to have competition, methods to be followed, contract cost and price, awarding agency review, bonding under certain conditions. We can provide acceptable methods when inconsistencies exist, contract provisions, and conflict of interest. Okay, those are your claw. We just kind of went through that: micro purchasing, small purchasing, sealed bids, and we're going to finish that tomorrow. So anybody that has any questions, I did it again. I went over a couple minutes, 2 minutes this time, not that bad. Any questions? We'll get into the rest tomorrow for our final day. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and she's got feedback in there, and take a picture of it if you need to get a hold of me. See you tomorrow, Melinda. She's giving you my email, and she's got a survey for you guys. And you're muted, my girl. There you go.
I just sent the feedback survey, as Cheryl said, and I also went ahead and put the presentation slides there as well. Please let us know what you thought about today's webinar. We greatly appreciate it, and Cheryl does take the time to read all of them. Don't forget to come to tomorrow's webinar. Tomorrow is day 5. If you have not seen day 1, day 2, day 3, or day 4, please go ahead and go on our YouTube channel. I'll go ahead and put the link there in a second, and you can watch all the webinar recordings to get caught up if you did miss anything. Also, remember that you can access any of the materials that was used in today's presentation, also the previous presentations, under your courses materials in the courses section. If you have a difficulty time finding these materials, please call us and we will walk you through it. As I just said, you can access any of the webinar recordings on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. You can also listen to our Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. And most importantly, we want to thank you all for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it and hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you, Cheryl.
You're welcome, sweetheart.